Boy, do I ever have some Bible verses for you today that are so applicable to what's going on in our world. Proverbs 14:15. Only simpletons believe everything they're told. The prudent carefully consider their steps. Or how about this? Proverbs 22:3. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Can you, just by listening to those, imagine who I'm going to apply that to? Anyway, these verses are so applicable today to what's going on in our country. And I just want to say to MAGA supporters who identify as Christians that those of you who I've talked to over the last 10 years online, almost to a person, has shown the most simplistic understanding of our world and how it works. And you've believed everything this president says, no matter how ridiculous or obviously untrue most of it is. The Bible teaches us to have some discernment in worldly affairs and not to believe everything we're told. But a lot of you have really swallowed hook, line, and sinker everything he's selling. And not only the US, but the entire world is going to pay a great price for that. Well, what am I talking about today? I could be talking about tariffs, I could be talking about due process or anything, but basically today I want to talk about Ukraine because we have in the White House today a man who is perfectly described as a simpleton, and he's applying the most simplistic thinking to all the issues, including Ukraine, and it's all going to end up in putting the world in a much more dangerous situation than we needed to be put in. And a lot of people who identify as Christians have helped put him there. They've helped put a man in office who is the king of all simpletons. He literally has the most shallow understanding of the issues he was elected to deal with. There's, you know what? There's almost no one I know personally who I don't think would make a better president. Even people I disagree with politically would make a better president. Even my friends who are Trump supporters, I mean, I have a lot of Christian friends who voted for Trump. I would rather see them as president. Because they're honest people. They voted for Trump, but I think, they're not the big hardcore rah-rah cheer everything MAGA does. They're not all gaga for MAGA. But they voted for Trump. They had their practical reasons for doing so, but it's not like they're in love with him. And they certainly don't like a lot of his policies. But anyway, today I want to talk about Ukraine because he posted a message online today that's so disturbing. And it literally shows the most simplistic understanding of what's going on there. And I'm going to show you, I'm not just making this up. I'm not just being hyperbolic. I'm going to show you proof in just a minute. Now, if you're a member of MAGA, I can only imagine that when you heard or read his message, you were probably thinking the whole way through it, that's right, that's right, that's right. But it literally just takes a pinch of curiosity and a 30-second Google search to realize that what he said is wrong on every point, factually and historically. And to think that he's basing life and death decisions on this misunderstanding. Or no, you know what? Not even a misunderstanding, not even a misunderstanding, but a complete ignorance, just complete ignorance of what has happened in Ukraine. He's using that misunderstanding to justify his opposition to Ukraine. But what he's doing goes totally against biblical teachings, like Psalm 82:4, which says, rescue the poor and helpless, deliver them from the grasp of evil people, which is so applicable to this case, but not that it was a command to nations to do specific things, but I think it means in this case that if you're the strongest and wealthiest nation in the history of humanity, in the history of mankind, and you have the ability to help, then you should probably help. When you see a nation like Ukraine that aligns with our values and was trying to become part of the Western nations, and they were trying to get into the European Union, when you see a country like that get brutally attacked by an authoritarian regime that's literally killing hundreds of thousands of innocent people, you should carefully consider lending a helping hand to that country. And that's exactly what the United States has always done. You know, I mean, back when we were great, but today we've turned a new corner and become part of what I think Reagan would surely call the evil empire. So let's take a look at this tweet from our fearful leader. Actually, before we do that, let's look at what he was talking about in his tweet. This is from the Wall Street Journal today. It was originally on the front page, and it's about Ukrainian President Zelensky saying he pushed back on a U.S. proposal to recognize Russia's control of Crimea as part of a ceasefire agreement, throwing into doubt President Trump's efforts to bring an end to the war. Now that nothing will anger Trump more than that. If you throw a wrench into his efforts to make himself look like a hero, he ain't gonna like that. But here's the quote. Ukraine, this is Zelensky speaking. He said, Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. He said at a press conference, there's nothing to talk about here. This is against our Constitution. Now remember what that said. It's going to come into play in just a minute. Now this is what our fearful leader said. He posted this morning. He said, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal like he had any control over where the Wall Street Journal placed the article. Anyway, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about here. Notice he left off part of the quote. He left off the part of the quote that says, let's see, Ukraine said this, there's nothing to talk about here. I won't recognize Crimea. There's nothing to talk about here. This is against our Constitution. Well, Trump conveniently left that part off. I wonder why. Anyway, he goes on to say, this statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama and is not even a point of discussion. Nobody is asking Zelensky to recognize Crimea as Russian territory, but if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? The area also houses, for many years, before the Obama handover, major Russian submarine bases. It's inflammatory statements like Zelensky's that makes it so difficult to settle the war. Now, I have an idea for the president. He could look so strong and make Biden look truly weak in comparison if he came out and said to Vladimir Putin, I'm going to crush you if you don't stop this war. I'm going to triple the sanctions, and I'm going to triple the amount of arms and weapons we're sending to Ukraine. If you don't get out, and you have, get this, 3 days to get out, or the sanctions are coming. And I'll give you another 3 days, and then the weapons are coming. If you're not out in 6 days, you're done. They don't seem to realize how close Russia is to going over the edge. So I don't know why they don't do that. That would genuinely make Biden look bad. But right now, he looks like a capitulator. Like in weakness, he's just surrendering to Putin for some reason. Nobody knows why. I mean, they say he loves a dictator, and maybe that's it. But anyway, now I just want to go through this a little bit, piece by piece, and point out a couple of things that are very interesting, actually. Okay, so I talked about, he leaves off the part about where Zelensky said, it's in our Constitution, I can't recognize Crimea. Now, but here's the thing. This statement is very harmful to peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama. First of all, Obama had nothing to do with it. It wasn't lost because Obama was president. He's a really funny guy. You know, anything that happened in the past under other presidents that went wrong, it's totally that president's fault in his mind. You know, little boy in Florida got bitten by a mosquito. President's fault, no mosquito control. You know, the president didn't get mosquito control in Florida. So the little boys are getting bitten by mosquitoes. But anything goes wrong when he's president, it's never his fault. It's amazing, right? It's never his fault. It's the media's fault. It's the judge's fault. It's Congress's fault, whatever. It's always somebody else's fault. It's unbelievable. So here he goes blaming Barack Hussein Obama, and I'm going to show you in just a minute how Obama had literally next to nothing to do with it, and how Obama actually did, and I didn't even know this until I looked into it. At the time, I thought Obama was weak and wasn't doing the right thing, but I looked into it a little more today and found out, you know what? Obama actually made a good decision here, and I'll show you why in a minute. And I was not an Obama supporter at the time, actually. But here's the crux of it. He says, but if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? Well, this is where it just takes a little curiosity. And I asked myself, who was president during that time when Russia annexed Crimea? So I go look it up. And guess who it was? It was a man named Viktor Yanukovych. Yeah, Yanukovych. Viktor Yanukovych, a Putin-aligned autocrat. How about that? The guy worked for Russia. And remember the time the Ukrainian, and I had forgotten most of this, but the Ukrainian people were revolting in the streets. They were protesting Yanukovych's rule. The people of Ukraine, they had been fighting hard for European Union membership. Remember that? They really wanted to be admitted to the European Union. And their parliament had passed a law approving the application to the EU. But Yanukovych refused to sign the law at the request of Putin, of course. And this angered the Ukrainian people so much that they just started revolting in the streets. And that's what precipitated those protests. And it led to him eventually fleeing the country. And wait till you hear where he went. But Yanukovych actively suppressed and sabotaged Ukraine's pro-Western aspirations, rejecting a major EU agreement under Russian pressure. And that sparked what's called the Euromaidan Revolution. He fled the country, and just 5 days later, get this, because the timeline's important here to understand how it's not Obama's fault and it's not Zelensky's fault. He fled the country, and just 5 days later, Russia began seizing key facilities in Crimea. And get this, he's now living in exile in Russia. Interesting, huh? So Ukraine had no ability at the time to fight Russia off because its just departed leader was pro-Russian, and Russia invaded just a few days later after he left when there was no stable leadership in Ukraine. Ukraine did ask for help a few days later. About 5 days later, they reached out to the West, the United States, the UK, and Russia, because we had all agreed in the 1990s that we would guarantee Ukraine's security. So they reached out to the three of us, I mean, including Russia, who was the one that had just invaded them. But they asked us to uphold our commitments to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The U.S., we provided financial assistance and non-lethal military aid. We refrained, though, from supplying lethal weapons because the Ukrainian government wasn't stable at the time. Does Trump really think we should have sent lethal weapons to a country that had just suffered, kind of basically a coup of the people, but had just suffered a change of leadership so suddenly under those kinds of conditions? No one in their right mind would do that. So if you identify as a Christian, then and you're a big, big Trump supporter and you love everything he does, at some point you have to ask yourself, are you following Christ, or are you just following a political movement that uses Christ's name to gain power? Because this isn't just about politics. It's about truth and justice. And it's about whether we're going to be a people who discern the times or just blindly follow the loudest voice in the room. You know, Proverbs doesn't celebrate ignorance, and no part of the Bible celebrates ignorance. It calls it dangerous. And when the church cozies up to a leader who embraces lies, rejects justice, and enables tyranny, that's not something Christians should be supporting. That's spiritual compromise. So if you've been cheering this man on and this movement on, especially in his betrayal of Ukraine, it's time to stop and ask, is this a faithful carrying out of all that Scripture teaches, or have you been supporting something that stands against Scripture? You got to ask. You really got to ask. Because your vote isn't just political, it's a witness to the world, and the world is watching. And with that said, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.